How can you ensure local interests are represented in as large and diverse a country as the United States? That's a question the nation has wrestled with since the ratification of the Constitution.
It's tricky, but this question goes to the core of understanding America's experiment of self-government. Where is the proper line dividing the states and national government? Today, we discuss the principle of federalism.
If I were to ask you where you lived, what would you say? Maybe your neighborhood, your town or city, the United States? There are quite a few layers to that question. Whose laws and regulations do you have to follow? All of them? What is this exactly? That is, at least in part, federalism.
In 1781, the United States ratified its first constitution, the Articles of Confederation. The hope of this League of Friendship was that the sovereign states would be unified, yet preserve control over decisions within their borders. The idea was that the country would collectively make decisions on things like treaties, but otherwise the states would be left to their own devices.
Though the national government achieved some notable successes, it soon became apparent to some that this loose confederation couldn't last. The weak national government was unable to provide solutions to several crises during the 1780s, such as Shays' Rebellion and trade wars between states, which led James Madison and others to call for reform.
A key problem for the Articles was that the national government could not directly rule citizens. For example, it could not tax them directly, but instead depended on requests to the sovereign states to tax their citizens and then hand the money over to the national government, something that most states rarely did.
Plus, the national government did not have a separation of powers or checks and balances, since it had no judiciary and a very weak executive elected by the legislature. The Congress only had one house, and all states, regardless of size, had one vote.
The result was the Philadelphia Convention in 1787 and a new constitution. One goal for this new constitution was to develop a system of government that would be strong enough to permanently cement the union of states without letting its size limit its ability to connect and respond to the needs of local interests and individuals. And that it did. As one of the great achievements of the Constitution was that it balanced state, national, and local interests by creating a national government with limited ends and reserving police powers and local control to the states.
However, not everyone was convinced. Some were concerned that the new government would quickly become consolidated at the national level. These opponents to the Constitution, called AntiFederalists, were worried that the concentrating of power would cripple the ability of the states to respond effectively to the needs of their citizens.
One prominent anti-federalist, writing under the pen name of Brutus, argued against the proposed system under the Constitution, warning, "It is true this government is limited to certain objects, or to speak more properly, some small degree of power is still left to the states, but a little attention to the powers vested in the general government will convince every candid man that if it is capable of being executed, all that is reserved for the individual states must very soon be annihilated."
James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and other supporters of the Constitution, called Federalists, pushed back. In a series of essays called the Federalist Papers, Madison and Hamilton detailed their defense of the Constitution. Specifically, in Federalist 39, Madison argued that the several parts of the Constitution, namely the Senate, Electoral College, and the amendment process, all preserved the state's voice and allowed their interests to be represented at the national level.
Eventually, the Federalists triumphed, through a state-by-state or federal ratification process no less, and thus, the new Constitution was ratified. But the fight for balance between the state and national government was far from over. From the fights over nullification, a civil war, and arguments over government spending and civil rights, debates over the appropriate constitutional balance between state and national power has been at the center of many of America's most contentious political moments.
How can we ensure our local interests are represented at the national level? Well, at least in part by mindfully debating the principle of federalism. In other words, what trajectory the future holds is up to you. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be sure to subscribe and like.
And comment down below.